Hello viewers, and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch, and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today, I'm going to be commentating over a pre-recorded match that I played with Chris, a good friend of mine also new to Conquest, who's also known on YouTube as the Mirkwood Runner. This is the first time I've ever commentated a match for any game, and though I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, this is literally the fourth game of Conquest I've ever played. So comments and constructive criticism regarding my gameplay, Chris's gameplay, and my commentary are very welcome in the comments section below. But with that said, let's get things started. Alright, so as you can clearly see, this video is going to be shot from my perspective. I'm of the Eldar faction, piloting the Orks Warlord Eldorath Starbane. Both of these decks today are only going to be including core set cards, and as you can see, Chris is going to be running Nazdreg. He's also splashing Chaos. Our first planet is Taurus, our second planet is Karnath, third is going to be Yavvarn, fourth is of course Aatrox Prime, and fifth is going to be Iridial. It looks like in my opening hand I've got a reasonable assortment of different cards. I've got some command icon heavy units like the Earthcast Technician, the Altansar Rangers as a ranged attacker, and I've got the hard-hitting Armorbane, a Yandon Wraithguard. So hopefully if I manage to get some copies of Gift of Isha, that's gonna be a fantastic benefit to me throughout this video. First up is Chris. He's got our initiative token. He's deploying an Enraged Orc, a 0/5 with one command icon and the Brutal keyword. He's chosen to deploy that to the first planet. It's now my turn for a deployment action. I'm going to go ahead and drop 3 resources on a Starbane's Council deployed to the first planet to challenge Chris. If either of us happen to win that first planet and we control fewer units than the other, we get our choice between 3 cards or 3 resources. Chris puts into play a 2-cost Teleportapad, which for combat action and exhausting it, allows him to move a target Orc unit to the first planet, which could potentially allow him some opportunistic attacks during the end-of-the-round action windows against me. Seeing as how this is one of the first matches I've ever played, I've cut out a lot of downtime, a lot of analysis paralysis from this video, so there's going to be quite a bit of time where I'm just sizing things up. Hopefully the majority of that was cut from the footage you're watching now. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly to deploy, trying to figure out what planets we've got in play. It looks like 3rd, 4th, and 5th planets are all possessing red icons, so we're probably going to see a very early game victory. I deploy the 3-cost Altansar Range to attack Rangers to the second planet, and seeing as how Chris has the initiative token, I'm looking to probably win as many command struggles as I can. He decides to play a 1-cost Rogue Trader, and he's ultimately figuring out he's going to deploy it to the 5th planet. So hopefully, if he manages to win that command struggle, he'll net 1 resource, 1 card, and I'm going to try and prevent him from doing that by playing an Earthcast Technician, also for 1 cost, matching that command icon value, also at Planet 5. I'm going to check the top 6 cards in my deck for a drone or attachment. I've got mobility and promotion as eligible targets. What am I ultimately going to choose, as if I don't already know? I pick mobility, and then I'm going to rearrange these cards at the bottom of my deck in any order. But I've got to figure out what I want to do with them. I'm very unlikely to draw through my deck, so I put my Guardians, Promotion at the bottom, followed by Swordwind Farseer, Changed My Mind, Starbane's Council, and Wild Rider Squadron. This deck I'm playing focuses on trying to control the command phase as much as possible, and then to hopefully leverage some extraordinarily hard-hitting attackers whether or not I can recur those into play with Gift of Isha to potentially destroy my opponent's Warlord or some of their hardier units. Chris plays a promotion on his Rogue Trader on Planet 5. I match his promotion, both of us playing zero-cost limited cards, so that once again we break even in regard to command icons, and I'm trying to do my utmost to at the very least deprive him of cards and resources. At the moment I don't have any resources left, whereas he has 2. He's down to 2 cards in hand, and I'm still at 4. I'm pretty limited in regard to shield icons, however. He decides to deploy a Snotling attack, and he's picking where his 4 tokens are going to go. So this might give him some early game pressure against me. He puts 1 token on 5th planet, 1 token on 1st, 2 tokens on 1st, so he's got 3 units to my 1 at the 1st planet, and he decides to put his 3rd token at the 1st planet. So at the moment, if I were to happen to win the battle at the 1st planet, I've certainly got far fewer units in play than he does, and I cannot say the same for him if he happens to be the victor. I attach my mobility to Planet 2, my Altansar Rangers there, giving them the mobile keyword so that they can hop between planets, and hopefully that's going to allow them to back up my Starbane's Council at Planet 1 should I choose to fight that ensuing combat there. So at the moment, it's looking like we're probably moving on to the command phase. We've both decided to commit our warlords to, let's see here, we're setting our dials presently, and I am ultimately going to go ahead and pick Planet 1, I believe. Chris has got quite a few units there, those 3 1/1 Snotlings, the 0/5 Orc with Brutal doesn't initially pose much of a threat, but seeing as how I'll eventually have to attack it regardless, that 5 hit point reservoir could be pretty nasty. Both of us choose to commit our warlords to the 1st planet. I've declared Eldorath to commit one of his Snotlings tokens to being exhausted. To the best of our ability, we try to use the arrows to indicate what we're attacking, what we're targeting. So he's got an exhausted token. Nazdreg 2/7 itself shows up. My warlord is only a 1/7, and we're trying to figure out command at the 1st planets. We break even, Chris and I, at the 2nd planet. I, of course, win 1 card, 1 resource. 3rd planet, no 1. 4th planet, no 1. 5th planet, he and I break even with 3 command icons apiece, and that brings us to the combat phase, where we have a window with which to use that mobile keyword. My Altansar Rangers does decide to move to an adjacent planet with mobile. Even though Chris has the initiative during our 1st round's worth of combat, I've got a ranged attacker, so I'll be able to hopefully get at least 1 shot off with this character before he gets a chance to respond. Although at the moment, it's tricky for me to pick what I want to target. I'm ultimately going to choose Nazdreg, wanting to avoid damaging that 0/5 Brutal Orc. He ditches a Battle Cry as a 2 shield card, so I certainly don't mind seeing that powerful event gone, but his warlord takes no damage. It's now his opportunity to attack, seeing as how he has initiative, and he attacks with Nazdreg. And ultimately, he picks my Fragile Rangers with 2 hit points. I've got only a single card with any shield value in my hand, and regrettably, I ditch my Ion Rifle just to try and preserve those Altansar Rangers. Ultimately, whether or not that was a mistake, feel free to let me know in the comments. My Starbane's Council attacks Nazdreg with 5, seeing as how his warlord is exhausted, and I actually take that back. Again, I apologize, very much a beginner at this game. I've decided to try and destroy his ready Snotling, which he lets the attack go through, just so I can try to minimize the amount of incoming damage prior to my attacking his warlord. He attacks with one of his 1/1s to my Altansar Rangers, and of course I was totally out of shield cards, did not actually manage to draw any shield cards during last round's command phase. Now I attack for 5 against his Warlord. Let's see if he has any shield cards versus that 5 value attack. I think he's trying to decide if he has anything. He does not decide to use anything. At the moment, he still has his teleportapad with which to use, but he's not deciding to move that Snotling's token. His Enraged Orc has to attack, even though it's at a value of 0. I made certain not to attack that unit, and he does opt to retreat his Warlord back to the HQ at the end of the combat round. All of our units ready, and let's see what happens. Chris still has the initiative despite his Warlord having left, seeing as how that does not change hands. One of his Snotlings attacks my Starbane's Council, and I have no option but to take that damage to the face. 2 hit points remaining on the Council. I next attack with my Warlord versus his unexhausted Snotling. And let's see if he decides to get rid of any shield card. He only has 1 card in hand, though unfortunately I have no idea what it is. He decides to ditch a Warp Storm, a very potentially devastating card, especially considering just how many units in my deck only have 2 or fewer hit points. But he does save that Snotling. He manages to put another point of damage on my Starbane's Council, and in response, I attack for 5, swing for 5 against one of his exhausted Snotlings tokens, which is of course outright obliterated, seeing as how he no longer possesses any cards in his hand. All of our units ready, and I am ultimately determining whether or not I want to retreat one or both of my units. I took a moment there to look up a rule regarding retreat specifically, and I decide to retreat my Starbane's Council. It of course exhausts upon arrival to the HQ. I wanted to make sure that retreating was any number of units, and that I could, say, retreat my Council without the Warlord. The Snotling takes another swing at my Warlord, and I'm trying to draw out this combat as long as I can, just to make sure to whittle away as many of those tokens as possible, though I definitely want to avoid putting any damage on his Orc, which yet again attacks for a monumental 0, amounting to effectively nothing. We reach the end of another combat round, and Chris attacks since he's got initiative. For 0, I swing, hit him for 1. That brings us to the end of another combat round, and ultimately I am going to choose to retreat. Therefore, I choose to forego potentially winning this fight. He claims the battle at the First Planets. So, unfortunately, I believe he and I are tied for units. I have 3 remaining. He has 4 sitting on the board, so he is unable to actually execute that battle effect, but he is going to be able to add 1 red and 1 green icon to his victory display. Our sequence for some of these events in the video is ever so slightly out of order, just because he and I'm sure, have nerves recording, and like I mentioned, it's my 4th ever game, and it's probably his 2nd or 3rd, or somewhere within his first handful. So there's no battle at planets 2, 3, or 4, or 5. So that's going to conclude the combat phase, and ultimately brings us to headquarters. Each of us draws our cards, resources, readies all of our characters. I ultimately drew a Viorla Marksman and an Eldar Survivalist, so it looks like I've got access to quite a wide range of hard-hitting attackers, as well as a ranged attacker, and some more economy-friendly units. First planet is now Karnath, and we've revealed our new 5th planet as Iluith, which, if you win a battle there, that victor gets to search the top 3 cards of their deck for any card they'd like, and add that card to their hand. So, I've got the initiative token now. I'm deciding to spend 4 resources on a Wild Rider Squadron deployed to the 2nd planet. That is going to allow me to use that combat action of his to potentially opportunistically shift over and capture the first planet, or move to the third planet depending on where fighting is taking place. Seeing as how Nazdreg already has 5 damage on him, I'm going to want to try and bloody that Warlord as quickly as possible, if I can at all manage to do so. I've taken a command lead at Planet 2, he deploys a Rogue Trader to Planet 3, so he's got a command lead there, and he potentially gains an additional resource if he happens to win a command struggle at that planet. He and I are still tied at Planet 4, and it looks like it's my turn to take a deployment round. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. I have 1 resource left. The only thing I could play is that Viorla Marksman, but will I choose to do so? It looks like I have spent a resource token, and ultimately the answer, ever so slowly, is going to be yes. I deploy Viorla Marksman to Planet 3, matching his Rogue Trader 1 command icon to 1 command icon, matching equal with him, so I'm not going to win a command struggle there without the assistance of a Warlord, but if we break even, I'm nevertheless depriving him of 2 resources and 1 card. He decides to use 2 of his total 4 resources, 1 of his total 4 resources to deploy an Ork Cannon to his HQ, and that's going to allow him during the combat phase to potentially snipe one of my units. I'm particularly concerned about my 3 command icon Earthcast Technician at Planet 4. We move into the command phase, and at this point I'm trying to figure out where exactly his Warlord is going to be committed so I can hopefully snipe it with my Starbane's Council. Is he going to go to 1st planet or 5th? Ultimately, I decide to take a little bit of a risk, and I assume that the 1st planet is too obvious, so I opt to commit to the 5th. Let's see what Chris picks. Ultimately, he has picked the 5th, so both of our Warlords are going to be commit to the same planet. Both of our allied army units are going to show up exhausted. He's got his 1/5 brutal attacker. He has his 1/5 brutal attacker there with him. 1st planet command struggle, nobody wins. 2nd planet, I'm going to draw a grand total of 1 resource token. 3rd planet, Chris and I break even. 4th planet, Chris and I break even. And the 5th planet, Chris and I break even. So even though I did not manage to draw any shield cards, which I'd have loved to see, I'd have also loved to get my hands on some additional resources, but I at least got 1 token, which I believe is more than I can say for Chris, and I did manage to essentially starve him of cards and resources. He at the moment only has a whopping 0 cards in his hand and 2 resources, whereas I'm sitting on a lone resource but 3 cards, though granted none of them have any shield icon capacity. I go ahead and use a combat action to shift my Wild Rider squadron during that initial combat round action window to the 1st planet. Seeing as how there has to be a battle taking place there, I want to try and snag that, and ultimately I will capture that uncontested. A battle is taking place at the 5th planet. I have the resource token. It looks like my Warlord has taken a point of damage from his Ork Cannon, actually. So he triggered the Ork Cannon targeting the 5th planet. I assigned that indirect damage to my Warlord, as opposed to allowing my Starbane's Council to die. So we're moving on along the table here, trying to figure out how Aatrox Prime's effect would resolve. Given that Karnath, I won the battle there, I can trigger the battle ability of any planet. Aatrox Prime lets you deal damage to an adjacent planet, so I assume that would have to be in turn, be adjacent to Planet 1. I decide to trigger the ability of Iridial, our Planet 4, to remove all the damage tokens from my Starbane's Council, which ultimately proves to be absolutely fantastic, seeing as how Nazdreg is no longer going to be able to one-hit kill, finish off that unit. As we move slowly along the table, it looks like we are eventually going to get to combat. Note that Chris did not opt to use his teleportapad to move a unit to the first planet in order to challenge my Wild Rider squadron. Whether or not you think that was the right choice, be sure to let us know, but in any case, I put another point of damage via Eldorath onto his Warlord. At this point, I don't actually notice he does not have any cards in hand, although I certainly don't have any surprises that would alter what I was doing regardless. He decides to retreat prior to my opportunity to swing and bloody his Warlord with Starbane's Counsel, and as a result, I trigger that battle ability, taking a peek at the top 3 cards in my deck, and I determine which of these to add to my hand. I've got a Marksman, a Survivalist, and a No Mercy. Considering just how much damage is on his Warlord, and the attack power of the Wraith Guard I have in my hand and the Starbane's Counsel I already have deployed to our 4th planet right now, I'm not terribly concerned about picking up No Mercy. I'm just trying to figure out, do I want another ranged attacker, seeing as how I got rid of one of my 3 ion rifles, but I ultimately pick a Survivalist. Or do I? Yes, I decide to put on the bottom of my deck, in that order, the Marksman and No Mercy. So I grab those Survivalists. They're very expensive. I'm feeling extremely strapped for resources, but they nevertheless could pay off very well if I manage to end up winning some command struggles. I was a little bit out of sequence there with capturing Planet 1 and forgetting to exhaust my Wild Rider squadron and move them to the HQ, but I do so now. They are exhausted. I've added the first planet to my victory display, and we move on to the new round. Our headquarters phase goes off. We draw 2 cards, generate 4 resources. I end up with a copy of Bealtan Guardians and Vashia Trailblazer. So 2 very economy-friendly units. Chris now has the initiative. His first deployment is for a Nazdreg's Flash Gits. He's determining which planet to deploy those to. He chooses the first planet. I've got a very nice counter to this in my Iandan Wraith Guard, which I choose myself to deploy to the first planet, in that 4 Armor Bane matches up with their 4 hit points perfectly well. He does happen to have the initiative token, but seeing as how Eldorath is very welcome to essentially exhaust any single enemy unit, I figure that would be a fantastic opportunity to potentially snipe off that unit and effectively win 3 resources worth of cards in my favor. So it is now his opportunity to take a deployment. He ultimately chooses to deploy a second copy of Nazdreg's Flash Gits to the first planet, and at this point, given that combat action of both of them, so long as he's willing to take a bit of damage, he could potentially attack me 4 times between those 2 units. I end up spending 1 resource token in response to deploy a Bealtan Guardian, but where ultimately am I going to put it? I was considering Planet 2, and this is another newbie mistake. I have to apologize to my opponent here. I rescind my move, pay an additional resource token, and ultimately settle with deploying a Vashia Trailblazer to the second planet. That is a 2 command icon mobile 1/1, and I'm hoping that I can either win a command struggle at the second planet to draw cards, hopefully with shield icons, and in any case get some additional resources despite not having any command combat tricks. Both he and I commit. I'm hoping he commits to the first planet. If I recall correctly, that's where I send my Warlord, hoping to kill some of his attackers. I deploy to Planet 1, and he is going to commit to Planet 3. So his enraged orcs follow his unit. They are exhausted. My Wild Rider squadron follows me, and he is exhausted. In determining command, I win the first planet, 1 resource, thanks to the presence of my Warlord. I win the second planet, 1 card, 1 resource, thanks to that Vashia Trailblazer. I won, and all the while I'm depriving him of additional cards and resources. I end up drawing a Nullify, which is absolutely fantastic. Another small thing out of sequence here is I forgot to declare I was exhausting one of his copies of Nazdreg's Flash Gits. At Planet 4, currently Elowith, I end up drawing 2 cards. I end up getting one of my Gift of Isha, which is absolutely fantastic, definitely something I want to see. I have the resources to play it. I've got my Iand and Wraithguard and Starbane's Council in play, both excellent targets for that event, and beyond that, it also has 2 shield icons. He triggers his Orc Cannon, and just like I feared, he picks Planet 3. So both of us have to assign 1 indirect damage. I have no option but my Earthcast Technician, and I decide to allow it to die. I do not want to discard my Nullify or Gift of Isha. I'm okay with him winning a command struggle on that planet next round if it just so happens to happen. And this, of course, means he is ultimately going to win a battle at that planet. I, unfortunately, had the oversight of failing to notice that the battle resolution of that ability is to remove all damage from a target unit, and seeing as how Nazdreg has 6 damage tokens, pretty decent target for that event. But I believe he and I are moving on to combat. I've got the combat initiative at the first planet, seeing as how my Warlord is there. I, of course, opt to attack Nazdreg's Flash Gits with my 4 attack Armor Bane, Iand, and Wraithguard, and effectively there's nothing he can do. He has 1 card in his hand. Whether or not it's a shield does not matter. I obliterate his Nazdreg's Flash Gits. He's exhausted, so I get off another free attack. I put a point of damage onto his Flash Gits. He is not choosing to use an action to ready that unit. Whether or not you agree with that, again, let us know. He decides to retreat, and I ultimately win the planet Yavvarn. I do notice that he has 1 card in hand. I don't have anything in my hand I'm tremendously impressed by. I'm definitely considering triggering that effect, just playing the odds, but out of fear of him having a rugged Killicans or Goth Knob or something like that, I end up not deploying it. Not triggering that effect. Swordwind Farseer probably would have been my ideal target there. Ultimately, my Warlord returns to HQ, and the Wild Rider Squadron, at the end of the combat phase prior to that battle resolution, again, ever so slightly out of sequence, I'll have triggered that action to move it to the next planet on down the line, so that it can start the next round in combat ready, unexhausted, at our new first planet. My Wraithguard, of course, returned to the HQ. At our 3rd planet here, he wins that battle uncontested, and like I mentioned, I totally failed to see that he's going to be able to remove an enormous 6 points of damage from Nazdreg, although thus far in the video he's not managed to benefit from the Warlord's ability regardless, so I'm not too terribly concerned, particularly considering my Starbane's Council and Iand and Wraithguard, and that Gift of Isha sitting in my hand. A new round starts, we generate 4 resource tokens, each draw 2 cards. I end up drawing a copy of Doom, which can essentially clear both of our headquarters. He currently has a wounded copy of Nazdreg's Flash Gits in his HQ, and I have an Iand and Wraithguard. So if I were to play that, both of us would be losing units. I also drew the Aleatok Shrine, Eldorath's signature support, whereas after an Eldar unit moves, I can exhaust that to ready that unit. Seeing as how my Wild Rider Squadron, though, is not exhausted, I opt not to play that. Trying to figure out where to deploy my unit here. I've got 2 red icons, 1 green, 2 blue, so this current first planet has 1 red, 1 blue icon, and this could very well decide the game if I happen to win. Chris, in turn, only has 1 red and 1 green, so at the moment he is a little bit behind. I trigger the ability of that Swordwind Farseer, taking a look at the top 6 cards. A lot of awesome stuff to choose from, including a Wild Rider Squadron, another copy of Iand and Wraithguard. Ultimately, I settle on a Gift of Isha. I'm going to be deploying heavily to the first planet, seeing as how this may very well decide the game. During Chris's deployment, after my initiative action, he deploys a rune-encrusted armor. His initial target is thinking to put it on that rogue trader, as at the moment I vastly outnumber him on the first planet. I'm looking to see what exactly I've got in my hand. I've still got 3 resources, 9 cards, relative to his 2 resources, 2 cards, so at the moment it's looking like I've done a decent job of starving him in a strictly economic sense. He ultimately changes his mind regarding deployment. Of course, he and I, as new players, are both okay with this. He opts to put that on his enraged orc, which is currently deployed at Planet 2. And seeing as how our board is running out of planets, our final planet, currently number 4, is Farron. So if anybody goes there, that allows them to route a unit. We both commit and reveal on our dials that we are both wanting to go to Planet 1. I've got 3 resources. I'm wanting to save those for Gift of Isha, and I was planning my deployments carefully so that I could hopefully accrue an additional resource token allowing me to get off 2 copies of Gift of Isha in the same round, if it just so happens that I need to do so. He moves his warlord to the first planet, and let's see what happens here. First planet, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... a grand total of 5 command icons relative to his 0. Both of us have a warlord present, so I'm ultimately going to end up drawing 1 card and 1 resource. Eldorath exhausts his copy of Flash Gits, although if they'd want to take a point of damage, they can ready themselves, and they have Brutal thanks to their Warlord, which would bring them to a total of 4 attack value. At the next planet, of course, Chris is the victor, uncontested of that command struggle. He gets 1 resource, 1 card. At Planet 3, I ultimately get to draw 2 cards, and I end up getting some decent army units, but I was more hoping for shields. My hand is very much full of army units and supports, and those are not going to do me much good in combat. Things are looking reasonably well at the moment. Chris has 3 cards, 2 resources. I've got 4 resources, 12 cards. He triggers this Orc Cannon to the first planet. Both of us have to assign a point of indirect damage. Where do I ultimately choose to place that damage? I'm trying to decide between my Marksman and my Farseer. At the moment, my Marksman, seeing as how I was not so fortunate as to affix an ion rifle to him, he's not going to do me a whole lot of good, so I ultimately assign that 1 point of damage to that 1/2 ranged attacker. Chris decides to lose his Rogue Trader, so he sacrifices the body of that 1/1 attacker. And Nazdreg and the exhausted 1 point of damage Nazdreg's Flash Gits are all he has left, until he decides to trigger his teleportapad to move his enraged orc to Planet 1. So it's currently got 3 points of damage on it, it has 4 hit points remaining, and it's got an attack value of 5. So at the moment, that's a pretty threatening attacker. My Wraith Guard followed my Warlord exhausted. Chris opts to use yet another combat action window to ambush a dire mutation, and he is ultimately going to affix that to which of my units. Of course, he has no way of knowing that I've got 2 copies of Gift of Isha in my hand. He ultimately does decide to affix that to my copy of the Iandan Wraith Guard. So it's going to be a little while before that dire mutation actually does any damage, and I've got a little bit of variety of regarding shield cards available in my hand. I believe we're almost to the ranged skirmish portion of combat. Chris only has 1 resource left with 2 cards. I've got Nullify ready if he happens to trigger an event. No battle cry or anything like that, however. I take a pot shot at his Nazdreg's Flash Gits. He ultimately plays 1 shield card, which manages to keep it alive. So that was one of his events down. He's down to 1 resource, 1 card, very much running out of surprises with which to leverage against me, and I've still got an abundance of ready units. I decide to take a swing at the Nazdreg's Flash Gits with my Wild Rider Squadron, and he ultimately allows it to die. Let's see what's next from Chris. He's got his Warlord, a 2/7, and he's still got that 5/4 enraged Orc. Very threatening presence on the battlefield. It's very capable of killing bloodying my Warlord if it just so happens to swing. This move actually surprised me, where he took a swing first with Nazdreg. I ultimately do expend Doom as a shield card to maintain the life of my Swordwind Farseer a little bit longer against the attack of his Warlord. I was saying his enraged Orc, if it attacks, there's nothing I can do to prevent it from bloodying my Warlord, but seeing as how I've got quite a few attackers still left at that planet, I wouldn't have been against a bloodying there. He decides to take a swing with his big, brutal, enraged Orc at my Wild Rider squadron, and I have to consider, do I want to spend a Gift of Isha to save its life? I ultimately decide no, because I think that would be better spent to get it back into play at full HP during a moment where it can opportunistically attack, and then he has to deal with a 100% HP unit all over again. Again, so long as I manage to win this fight, I will ultimately seal the game for myself. I take a swing with my Swordwind Farseer and Vashia Trailblazer at his Warlord. At this point, he does have one card, but he does take those attacks. 3 points of damage, and that brings us to the end of this combat round. If he opts to retreat, at this point he will have lost. We ready our units. That dire mutation is now posing a bit of a threat. I've still got initiative. I take a swing at his enraged Orc with my 4 Armor Bane. Whatever that one remaining card in his hand happens to be, he cannot play any shields against me, and his 5/4 attacker is obliterated. Rune-encrusted armor follows it into the discard pile. Here I get a little bit confused, and I forget that there's no second range skirmish round. So excuse that exhaustion there. Chris, realizing things are looking very grim indeed, nevertheless exhausts Nazdreg, declaring him as an attacker. But against what unit? Ultimately, he picks the Swordwind Farseer to get a little bit of vengeance, and I allow that attack, of course, to go through. It's now the top card of my discard pile. It ultimately dies. My Iyanden Wraithguard is sitting there with 1 point of damage from that dire mutation I did not bother to block. Eldorath and the Vashia Trailblazer both decide to ping Nazdreg for a single point of damage apiece. Grand total of 2 bloodies Nazdreg. He is immediately forced to retreat to the HQ, and that ultimately means that I am victorious on Aatrox Prime. If I'd like, I could trigger that battle ability to blow up his units at the adjacent planet, but of course, at this point, I've managed to amass 3 red icons and 3 blue icons, and at this moment, the Eldar faction is victorious, and fortunately, I have won during my first ever commentated match. So, I'll just go ahead and end this video right now by saying, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to this channel if you have not done so already. If you'd like to see additional content from this channel regarding commentated videos, whether you like pre-recorded games such as this one, whether you'd like to see other players submit their games that I could commentate over where I don't already know the outcome, be sure to let me know in the comments. Or if you'd prefer to watch more casual games where I'm simply recording live as the game is occurring, let me know your preference as well. So, like I mentioned at the onset of the video, this has been my 4th ever game of Conquest. Comments and criticism, hopefully constructive, are very much welcome regarding both my commentary and gameplay, as well as Chris's gameplay as well. So, very good game. Thank you yet again for watching, and be sure to check back soon for ever more content yet to come.